We have more for Your Ears Only. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Melissa Axelberth with a quote from the news. It's a good thing she wasn't governor during her grandfather's day. That was Frank Sharry, executive director of America's Voice, after learning that New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez's grandfather was an undocumented immigrant from Mexico. Governor Martinez has recently pushed for a crackdown on undocumented workers. Now this.
What we've learned is that the war on drugs has increased drug usage. It's filled our jails. It's cost millions of dollars and other currencies of taxpayer dollars, and it's fueled organized crime worldwide.
However good our intentions, regardless of our resource challenges, and notwithstanding the legal hurdles we face in fighting firearms traffickers, we made mistakes.
It is a war that's been waged even longer than the war on terror, and increasingly the war on drugs faces the same kind of critical questions over strategy, cost, and effectiveness, as underscored this summer by Virgin Group founder Richard Branson, a member of the Global Commission on Drug Policy. One of its victims was William McMahon, who lost his job as Deputy Assistant Director of Field Operations for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives for his role in the misbegotten Fast and Furious program, to permit and track gun sales across the border to drug gangs in Mexico and elsewhere in Latin America.
With us to consider the long-running problem and what can be done about it for Your Ears Only is Larry Birns, director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, which we must note is a supporter of this program. Thanks for joining us again.
David, hello to you, and Melissa as well.
President Obama had promised to change national drug policy, suggesting the war on drugs be recategorized as a public health issue, with hopes that meant more leniency, at least for marijuana users, and less role for drug gang distribution and turf wars. What happened?
Well, I think that the administration's war on drugs has become a great big yellow submarine because, in fact, rather than to elevate the silhouette and make it a more visible foreign policy engagement, the war against drugs has been rapidly evaporating, and days go by and there's no reference at all to it, either in primary or secondary news sources. So we're really wondering whether the administration, like so many other aspects of the administration's foreign policy, whether its anti-drug policy is alive and well in Latin America. I mean, a lot of Latin American experts are saying, the thing isn't working. It hasn't worked for years. It's cost thousands of lives and precious resources that we can ill afford. And there's an increasing crescendo of conversation and advocacy of decriminalization and legalization of drug usage.
Talk about the way domestic drug problems and policies are affecting Washington's relations with other countries in the hemisphere. With the U.S. accounting for 36% of global cocaine consumption by one account, Mexican President Felipe Calderón has called the U.S. the biggest drug addict in the world.
Well, yes, and that had a great deal of redolence throughout the hemisphere when he made that statement. He, of course, had dramatically altered the traditional silhouettes of that war by militarizing it and throwing in 45 or 50,000 Mexican soldiers and into the war and hugely increasing the number of casualties. As a result of that, there's a great deal of disillusionment that the war isn't working, that what keeps it alive are the vested interests. In fact, soon after he took office, President Obama was asked the question, would his administration countenance legalization? Well, he laughed. He laughed, I guess, suggesting that there's no prospect for archly political reasons, that there's no prospect that the war will be decriminalized. What we've seen taking place in the region is a fusion of the anti-drug campaign, the administration's anti-drug campaign, and the booming common crime taking place in the hemisphere, which has formed alliances which consists of syndicates, and which all of a sudden we realize that the threat being posed by crime is not the terrorist variety of that crime. in so much as it is the common crime, the kidnapping, the extortion, the bank robberies, and the assassinations of various kinds. This is where the violence is occurring, and this is where neither the United States nor any of the other hemispheric countries seems to have effective strategy to organize the war against it.
Well, you talk about alliances. I wonder, with all of the power that the narco gangs are now showing, even though it's mostly in common crime, whether there's any fear that Islamic extremists could see this as a mechanism that they could tie up with and more effectively cross the border and penetrate the United States, find finances, create terror.
There's been very little evidence that there's that any kind of terrorism is taking place in Latin America, and the administrations would be extremely anxious to come up with evidence in which it could prove its case and justify the allocation of such a large percentage of resources from the Latin American countries. The fact is that the administration is not proving its case. The fact is that millions of dollars, billions of dollars of scarce area resources are being allocated to a war that has reflected very few victories and very little evidence that it deserves being called a war at all.
Larry Birns is the director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, a research group that monitors the full scope of U.S.-Latin American relations, and a supporter of this program.
And this has been For Your Ears Only.